You've been taught that loneliness kills, that isolation breaks men, that you need others to stay sane. Every word of that is a lie designed to keep you obedient, predictable, and weak. You've been conditioned, programmed to believe that isolation is a symptom, a red flag, a precursor to collapse. They've taught you that loneliness is a disease, that solitude is dangerous, that a man alone is a man in crisis. Every institution, from universities to wellness apps to mental health campaigns, repeats the same script: stay connected, reach out, don't isolate. They frame it as compassion, as care, as science. It's control. The modern pathologization of solitude is not medicine, it's a containment protocol. Because an isolated mind is an ungovernable mind. A man who withdraws from the noise cannot be tracked, influenced, or pacified. He cannot be fed narratives. He cannot be sold solutions. He cannot be managed by algorithms that rely on his participation, his data, his predictable emotional reactions to curated stimuli. Loneliness has been weaponized as a diagnosis to keep you tethered. The moment you feel the pull towards solitude, you're told something is wrong with you. You're depressed, you're antisocial, you need help, you need them. The system has rebranded independence as illness because independence is expensive to control. A man who needs no one is a man who obeys no one. Consider what they call mental health in practice. It is not the cultivation of strength, clarity, or resilience. It is the restoration of your ability to function within pre-existing social and economic structures. Therapy is not designed to make you sovereign. It is designed to make you stable enough to continue participating, to return to work, to maintain relationships, to keep consuming. The goal is not your power. The goal is your reintegration into systems that require your compliance. True solitude terrifies the herd because the herd cannot survive without members. Every collective, whether it's a social circle, a corporate culture, or a digital platform, needs you to stay plugged in. Your presence validates the collective. Your absence exposes its fragility. When you withdraw, you stop feeding the ecosystem that feeds on your attention, your labor, your need for belonging. And so they've built an entire infrastructure around preventing your departure. Social media gamifies connection. Workplaces enforce collaboration. Culture glorifies extroversion. Even your closest relationships are laced with subtle expectations. Be available. Be responsive. Be present. The message is clear. Your value is tied to your visibility. Your worth is measured by your accessibility. But here is the inversion they will never teach you. The most dangerous men in history were forged in isolation, not in crowds. The men who rewrote the rules, who bent nations to their will, who became untouchable, they all shared one practice. They disappeared. They withdrew. They spent years, sometimes decades, in total solitude, away from the noise, the opinions, the distractions. And when they returned as something else, something the herd could not recognize, predict, or stop. Isolation is not a breakdown. It is a laboratory. It is the only environment brutal enough to strip away every false layer you've built to survive socially. In solitude, there is no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to lie to. You are left alone with the unvarnished truth of what you actually are. Not what you pretend to be, not what others need you to be, but what remains when all external validation is removed. And that terrifies them, because a man who knows himself in isolation no longer needs their approval. He no longer fears their rejection. He no longer plays by their rules. He becomes unmanageable, unpredictable, lethal. The system labels this as dangerous because it is, but not to you, to them. Your brain was not designed for the modern world. It was shaped over millennia to operate in small, stable groups where social feedback was rare, direct, and consequential. Today, you are subjected to a constant, unrelenting flood of input: texts, notifications, opinions, reactions, updates, from hundreds, sometimes thousands of sources. Your nervous system cannot differentiate between a life or death tribal judgment and a stranger's comment on your post. It treats all social input as survival-relevant data. This is not connection. This is cognitive warfare. Every ping, every notification, every unsolicited opinion creates a micro-interruption in your executive function. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for strategic thinking, impulse control, and independent analysis, operates on deep, uninterrupted focus. It needs silence to perform. When you are constantly accessible, constantly responding, constantly consuming the thoughts of others, you are chemically incapable of original thought. Your brain enters a reactive mode. It begins to outsource judgment. The science is clear. Chronic social stimulation floods your system with cortisol and dopamine in erratic, unpredictable cycles. Cortisol keeps you vigilant, anxious, scanning for threats in the form of social disapproval. Dopamine rewards you for engagement, for validation, for the temporary relief of being seen and approved. Together, they create a dependency loop. You become addicted to external input, not because it makes you stronger, but because its absence now feels like danger. This is learned helplessness at the neurological level. You have trained your brain to seek permission before thinking, to check consensus before deciding, to measure the value of an idea by how others react to it, rather than by its objective merit. You are no longer processing reality. You are processing the herd's interpretation of reality, and you have mistaken that for wisdom. Proximity to the herd creates what we call cognitive pollution. Just as your lungs would suffer breathing toxic air, your mind deteriorates when constantly exposed to the undisciplined, reactive, emotion-driven thought patterns of the masses. Most people do not think. They echo. They absorb narratives, repeat talking points, and mistake familiarity for truth. When you are embedded in this environment, you inevitably absorb its patterns. You begin to think in their language. You begin to see through their frameworks. You become, functionally, a node in their network rather than a sovereign intelligence. Isolation destroys this mechanism. When you remove yourself from constant input, your brain is forced to return to first principles. There is no one to agree with, no one to impress, no echo chamber to validate your biases. You are left alone with the question, what do I actually believe, and why? Most men cannot answer this. They have never had to. They have spent their entire lives surrounded by voices telling them what to think, and they have mistaken that chorus for their own mind. In true solitude, the noise stops. The cognitive pollution clears. Your prefrontal cortex, no longer hijacked by social anxiety and approval seeking, begins to function as it was designed. You start to notice patterns you were too distracted to see. You start to question assumptions you were too comfortable to challenge. You start to think in ways that are dangerous, not because they are irrational, but because they are yours. This is why isolation is not a retreat. It is a recovery. You are not running from the world. You are reclaiming your ability to perceive it clearly. History does not lie. Strip away the narratives, the romantic revisionism, the sanitized biographies, and one pattern emerges with absolute consistency. The men who dominated their eras were forged in isolation. Niccolo Machiavelli, the man whose name became synonymous with ruthless strategy, wrote The Prince in Exile. He had been tortured, stripped of power, and banished from Florence. Most men in his position would have collapsed into bitterness or irrelevance. Machiavelli retreated to his estate and spent years in total intellectual solitude, studying the mechanics of power with surgical precision. He had no audience, no validators, no one to soften his conclusions. The result was a text so cold So accurate, so devoid of moral compromise that it has been banned, burned, and condemned for 5 centuries. It was born in isolation. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and advisor to emperors, spent years in exile on Corsica. He could have used that time to beg for reinstatement, to maintain his social standing through letters and political maneuvering. Instead, he used isolation as a forge. He wrote essays on anger, on the shortness of life, on the futility of wealth. He dismantled his own ego in the silence. When he returned to Rome, he was no longer a man seeking approval. He was a man who had transcended the need for it. The Desert Fathers, Christian monks who fled to the Egyptian wilderness in the 3rd and 4th centuries, deliberately subjected themselves to the most extreme isolation human beings can endure. No society, no stimulation, no comfort, just sand, silence, and the unrelenting confrontation with their own minds. They reported visions, psychological breakdowns, demonic hallucinations. Modern psychologists would call it psychosis. They called it purification, and the writings they produced remain some of the most penetrating psychological texts ever created. They understood the human mind at a depth no academic has matched, because they studied it in the only laboratory that matters: total solitude. Napoleon Bonaparte, during his exile on Elba, did not collapse. He planned, he studied, he refined his understanding of strategy, logistics, and human nature. 11 months later, he escaped, returned to France, and reclaimed power in what historians call the 100 Days. A man alone on an island defeated an entire coalition of European powers through sheer will and strategic clarity. Isolation did not weaken him, it concentrated him. Modern examples are no different. Naval Ravikant openly advocates for long periods of solitude, claiming that his most valuable insights come not from conversation, but from silence. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, all of them built isolation into their routines as a non-negotiable practice. They called it think weeks or deep work. The language is softer, but the mechanism is identical. Withdrawal from the herd to preserve cognitive sovereignty. Even prisoners, men stripped of freedom, dignity, and power, have used isolation as a weapon. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, much of it in solitary confinement. He emerged not broken, but refined. He had spent decades alone with his thoughts, and in that crucible, he became the most influential political figure of his generation. Malcolm X, while incarcerated, transformed himself from a street criminal into one of the most disciplined, articulate, and dangerous intellectuals in American history. He read obsessively, he studied alone, he rebuilt his mind in a cell. The pattern is undeniable. Isolation is not a symptom of decline, it is the precondition for transcendence. You think your relationships are assets, you think your network is strength. You are wrong. Every connection you maintain is a potential vector of compromise. Every person who knows you is someone who can manipulate you. Every relationship you depend on is a chain. Watch what happens when a man's reputation is attacked. Watch how quickly he folds. Watch how his need for social approval overrides his principles, his logic, his self-interest. He will apologize for things he didn't do. He will abandon positions he knows are correct. He will sacrifice his integrity to restore his standing in the eyes of people who, in 6 months, won't even remember his name. This is not weakness of character. This is the inevitable result of cognitive dependency on external validation. You have been socialized to fear rejection more than failure, to fear isolation more than mediocrity, to fear being alone more than being wrong. This is by design. A man who cannot tolerate disapproval cannot resist pressure. A man who needs to be liked cannot make ruthless decisions. A man who requires consensus cannot lead. Your need for connection is not a virtue, it is a vulnerability. Consider the modern executive, the entrepreneur, the public figure. They are surrounded by advisors, teams, supporters, fans. They are praised for their collaborative leadership, their emotional intelligence. And then, the moment the environment shifts, the moment public opinion turns, the moment their stakeholders panic, they collapse. Why? Because they have built their identity on external approval. They have outsourced their self-worth to the crowd, and when the crowd turns, they have nothing left. Look at the men destroyed by cancel culture, not because they committed crimes, but because they could not survive isolation. Their entire psychological structure was built on visibility, validation, and social capital. When that was stripped away, they disintegrated. They issued groveling apologies. They begged for reinstatement. They became unrecognizable because they were never operating from an internal locus of power. They were hollow. Now consider the opposite. The men who were attacked and simply disappeared, who stopped responding, who refused to engage, who withdrew into silence and rebuilt in private. The crowd moved on. The outrage faded, and when those men re-emerged, they did so on their own terms, often stronger than before. Why? Because they had no dependency on public approval. Isolation was not a punishment for them, it was a strategy. Your friendships are the same. Most of them are transactional, even if you refuse to see it. You maintain them because they make you feel good, because they provide social proof, because they distract you from the discomfort of being alone. But watch what happens when you stop initiating. Watch how many of those relationships evaporate. This is not a statement about their character. It is a statement about the nature of social connection. Most of it is shallow. Most of it is conditional. Most of it is maintained out of habit, not loyalty. The most dangerous lie you've been told is that you need other people to stay sane. The truth is the opposite. Constant proximity to others is what erodes your sanity. It forces you to perform. It forces you to manage perceptions. It forces you to suppress the parts of yourself that don't fit the social script. Over time, you forget what you actually think, what you actually want, what you actually are, because you've spent so much energy being what others need you to be. Isolation removes this burden. In solitude, there is no performance. You are left alone with reality, and reality is this. You are more capable, more intelligent, and more resilient than the version of yourself you present to the world. But you will never access that version as long as you remain tethered to the herd. Isolation is not exile. It is an architecture. A deliberate, calculated restructuring of your environment, your time, and your attention to create the conditions for total cognitive sovereignty. The first phase is digital severance. Your phone is not a tool. It is a tether. Every app, every notification, every badge is designed to interrupt you, to pull your attention outward, to make you react instead of think. Delete social media from your phone. Not take a break. Delete it. If your business requires it, access it from a laptop once per day in a designated time block. Turn off all notifications except calls from a pre-approved list of 3 people. Do not check your phone for the first 2 hours after waking. Do not touch it for the last hour before sleep. Sever the connection or accept that you are being managed by algorithms smarter than you. The second phase is social pruning. You do not need a network. You need 3 to 5 high-signal relationships, people who are competent, honest, and demand nothing from you except mutual respect. Everyone else is noise. The acquaintances, the friends you see twice a year, the people you follow out of politeness or obligation, they are cognitive overhead. Disappear from them. Stop replying. Stop initiating. Stop attending events you don't want to attend. Stop maintaining relationships out of guilt. Most people will not notice. The ones who do will forget within weeks. The third phase is environmental isolation. Your physical space must become a monastery. You cannot think deeply in a chaotic, cluttered, overstimulated environment. Your workspace should contain nothing that does not serve your immediate objective. No TV, no decorations that distract, no visible mess. Silence is not optional. It is mandatory. If you live with others, establish non-negotiable boundaries. Lock the door. Create a visual signal that you are unreachable. Train the people around you to respect your withdrawal, or remove yourself from environments where that respect is impossible. The fourth phase is temporal sovereignty. Block 3 hours per day, minimum, for uninterrupted isolation. No inputs, no meetings, no exceptions. During this time, you do one of three things: think, plan, or build. Thinking means wrestling with a single hard question until you have an answer. Not a comfortable answer. A true answer. Write it down. Argue with yourself. Dismantle your own assumptions. Planning means projecting your life, your business, your strategy 6 months to 5 years ahead. Not vague goals. Specific scenarios. What happens if this fails? What happens if this succeeds? What are the second-order consequences? You cannot plan strategically in a reactive state. Building means creating output. Writing, designing, coding, training, whatever translates your vision into reality. Most men spend their lives talking about what they will do. Isolated men do it. The fifth phase is extended withdrawal. Once per quarter, engineer 5 to 7 days of total isolation. No phone, no internet, no people. Rent a cabin, book a monastery stay. Go somewhere with no Wi-Fi, no cell service, no distractions. This is not a vacation. This is a reset. You're not relaxing. You are rebuilding. Isolation is not a phase. It is a permanent operating system. You do not withdraw once and return fixed. You build withdrawal into your life as a non-negotiable discipline. Weekly, monthly, annually. The more visible you become, the more isolation you require to remain sovereign. True isolation does not improve you. It destroys you first, and most men, when faced with that destruction, will abort the process. When you enter prolonged, uninterrupted solitude, when there is no one to perform for, no one to validate you, no external structure to hold your identity in place, you will experience what clinical psychology calls ego dissolution, what mystics call the dark night of the soul, what I call identity death. Every version of yourself that you present to the world is a construct, a mask, a performance optimized for survival in social environments. You're not one person. You are a shifting collection of personas, each activated depending on context. The you at work, the you with family, the you with friends. These are not expressions of a core self. They are tactical adaptations, and they are held together by external feedback. Isolation removes the audience, and without the audience, the masks stop functioning. There is no one to impress, so the high-status persona collapses. There is no one to reassure, so the caretaker persona dissolves. One by one, every identity you've built evaporates, and you are left with a question you have spent your entire life avoiding. What remains? For most men, the answer is nothing, or worse, something they do not recognize, something weak, something ashamed, something they have been running from since childhood. In the silence, you will confront every lie you've told yourself, every compromise you've rationalized, every ambition you've abandoned, every person you've betrayed, starting with yourself. You will see, with unbearable clarity, the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. This is not depression. Do not pathologize it. This is necessary violence. You are not breaking down. You are being broken open. The false self, the conditioned self, the obedient self that was built to make you functional in a system designed to extract value from you, that self must die. You will experience fear, not the fear of external threats, but the fear of internal emptiness. The fear that, without the roles you play, you are nothing. This fear is ancient. It is the same fear monks faced in the desert, the same fear prisoners face in solitary. It is the price of transformation. You will experience rage at the people who conditioned you, at the systems that shaped you, at yourself for allowing it. This rage is useful. Do not suppress it. Channel it. Let it burn away every false loyalty, every unexamined belief, every inherited obligation that you've carried without question. You will experience grief for the time lost, for the potential wasted, for the man you could have been if you had started this process sooner. Let it happen. Mourn what must be mourned, but do not linger. And then, if you endure long enough, something shifts. The noise in your head begins to quiet. The compulsive self-judgment begins to fade. The need for external validation begins to dissolve. You stop asking, what would they think? Because there is no they. There is only you. And in that aloneness, a strange and terrifying clarity emerges. You begin to see your life as it actually is, not through the distorted lens of social expectation, but as raw data. And for the first time, you're interpreting this data through your own sovereign judgment. This is the birth of the isolated mind. The man who emerges from this process is not the man who entered it. He does not think like his former self. He does not react like his former self. He does not need like his former self. He has been stripped of every dependency, every illusion, every comfortable lie. What remains is harder, colder, more precise, less attached, less manipulable. This is not enlightenment. This is weaponization. You are now standing at a fork. Behind you is everything you have been taught to value: visibility, connection, collaboration, likability, acceptance. Ahead of you is the path almost no one takes. Total psychological sovereignty through deliberate, sustained isolation. You cannot walk both paths. The world you inhabit is not designed for your ascension. It is designed for your containment. Every system, educational, corporate, social, digital, functions on the assumption that you will remain predictable, accessible, and dependent. The moment you become unpredictable, the moment you become inaccessible, the moment you sever your dependency on external validation, you become a threat, not because you are violent, but because you are unmanageable. Power, in its truest form, is not the ability to control others. It is the ability to remain uncontrolled. The men who reshape industries, who topple institutions, who operate with total strategic freedom, they are not the most charismatic or the most connected. They are the most isolated. They have built psychological fortresses so impenetrable that no amount of public opinion, social pressure, or collective outrage can move them. This is the doctrine. Isolation is the irreplaceable precondition for sovereignty. You cannot think clearly while drowning in input. You cannot plan strategically while enslaved to the approval of others. You cannot act ruthlessly while burdened by the need to be understood. Here is your protocol. Execute it or discard everything you've just absorbed. Immediate severance. Within 24 hours, delete every social media app from your phone. Disable notifications on everything except direct calls from 3 people. Do not announce this. Simply disappear. Social audit. Identify every relationship in your life that is transactional, draining, or based on obligation. Stop engaging. Stop replying. Let them fade. Environmental control. Redesign your physical space to eliminate distraction. Remove the television. Remove clutter. Establish non-negotiable boundaries around your solitude. Temporal discipline. Block 3 hours per day, minimum for uninterrupted isolation. Use this time to think, plan, or build. This is not optional. Extended withdrawal. Once per quarter, engineer 5 to 7 days of total isolation. No phone, no internet, no people. This is where identity death occurs. This is where sovereignty is forged. If you execute this, you will become unrecognizable within 6 months. The man you are now will seem weak, reactive, pathetically dependent on approval you no longer need. That man will die. And something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous will take his place. But if you do not execute this, if you absorb this information and do nothing, you have revealed something about yourself. You have revealed that you prefer the comfort of the herd to the sovereignty of the isolated mind, and that is fine. The herd needs members, the system needs participants. The choice was never about isolation versus connection. It was always about sovereignty versus submission, and submission, no matter how pleasant, is still a cage. The isolated mind is the deadliest mind, not because it seeks destruction, but because it cannot be controlled. And in a world built on control, that makes you either irrelevant or unstoppable. Decide which. Now,